Tonight, we're exploring trans identities through various mediums with two very, very special guests. Steven Appleby is an award-winning cartoonist and graphic novelist whose latest book is Dragman. And our second guest, Alex Reeve, is a best-selling crime writer whose third novel is The Butcher of Berners Street, which is part of a series. Steven, you performed at Polari a number of times over the years. It's nice to see you again through the power of Zoom.
Yeah, it's lovely to be here. I was just saying that I'm not used to doing Zoom. I've managed to spend a year almost hardly ever doing it. So
where have you been?
Yeah, it's all a bit so this. Yeah. Anyway,
Dragman came out just as the lockdown, well, just before the lockdown in March. How has it been for you launching a book and then all this happening?
It was really great to get the book launch in just before it happened, but yes, I mean, I was already getting anxious about it when the book launch came along, and I remember somebody saying, you know, we're all packed in here, and Soho is kind of like Christmas Day, you know, empty streets and stuff, and here we all are packed in Gosh Comics and then Jerry's Club celebrating this book. And in fact, me and my family and various friends of ours all got ill about a week later. So,
oh my goodness.
So I don't know whether we caught it at the book launch or whether we were already, you know, exposed. But yeah, it was. And then what, of course, happened was that all the events I was supposed to do got cancelled. And I was supposed to go to New York because it came out in America, and I was meant to go to Germany and Holland because it came out in Holland, and you know, none of that happened. So it was all a bit disappointing, but not as disappointing as if I'd had a stage show about to go on or something. So
yeah,
so small, you know.
And the book's won a prize. You were telling me recently in an email.
Well, yeah, the French edition won the special jury prize at the Angoulême Comic Festival, which was amazing. And you know, it's a really big graphic novel prize, which I'd never expected to come anywhere near winning. So that was fantastic, and kind of put all the worries I had about the book. You know what it's like when you do a book and you worry about it, and you know, oh, it could have been better, and you know, all of that. And I just, after winning the Angoulême prize, I thought, okay, I'm going to stop worrying
until the next time.
Until the next time, yeah, exactly.
Dragman takes a familiar superhero trope, which is that of a double sort of secret life, and this character having these two lives, and also the idea that the costume is empowering, which I think is really interesting.
Well, yeah, basically, Dragman kind of came into being in 2002 as a character in my Guardian weekly strip, and it was and she. I've always called Dragman he, which some people have commented on, but anyway, Dragman always seemed to me to be able to do more. You know, there seemed to be more to the character, and I'm going to show some images, but basically, I used to sort of, you know, I was closeted. I'd been kind of dressing in women's clothes since I suppose the late 70s, well, mid 70s, and
with computer audio.
But didn't. Are you hearing me all right?
Yeah.
Yeah. But I was completely kind of secretive because it was one of those things that I was terribly kind of embarrassed about, you know, and all of that. So it, you know, the total secret life thing that was common back in the 70s, 80s, and so on. And so it just struck me that at one point that Dragman, who sort of popped into my head as a man who had superpowers when he put on women's clothes, it just seemed a lovely parallel with the superhero thing, who have secret identities and so on. And I thought I could do, rather than just the odd strip, I could do a whole book exploring the truth of well, my trans experience, and also make it entertaining with the superhero side.
So would you like to give us your first presentation, Stephen?
As I've been sort of sitting here, I've kind of changed my mind about how I'm going to do it. So, which is sort of typical.
Improvise.
So here goes, and let's hope it sort of works out. I mean, this is the first Dragman comic strip, and this was 2002, and you know, and it took me, I don't know, 18 years or whatever it is, 17 years to get to the point of doing a book. This is one section. My name's August Crimp, and I like to wear women's clothes. I'm on my way to the art museum. Goldfish Boy sits in the window of the No Hope Cafe looking out. I lift my hand in greeting, but he just stares. Mouth open. Over the park, a plane jettisons passengers. I watch them fall silently. It's always the ones without souls who go first. Souls are valuable, and you can get a great deal of money for your soul. When the soul was discovered, there was much excitement. We all have souls, even the wicked people. When trading in souls began, many people joined in. What use was your soul? Better to have a new car than something ancient and invisible. Only when your soul was gone, nothing made much sense anymore. Except jumping out of a plane. One, please. Yes, ma'am. I like the museum because no one bothers me here. I feel safe. I've never seen anyone I know. Tea, please. Until today, when outside on the cafe balcony, I saw Cherry mingle. She was playing with one of those new floating dolls there's a craze about. When Cherry started taking selfies on her phone, I ducked down to keep out of the picture. You see, the Mingles live right opposite Mother and me. They never liked us except for Cherry. She always smiled. If the Mingles saw me here dressed as a woman, God, I dread to think. They'd laugh and everyone would hear of it. So I really wasn't paying attention when Cherry sat up on the balustrade. Not bad, let's try one more. Did I mention that I can fly? Oh, sorry, that's rather important. When I put on women's clothes, I can fly. It just happens. When I was a teenager, I found a stocking down the back of the sofa, and I put it on instinctively, without thinking. That was the first time I flew. Phew. So when Cherry Mingle fell off the Art Museum Cafe balcony, oh my God, did you see that? I didn't want to be noticed. I didn't want to stand out. The girl fell. Cherry? Did I mention that the cafe at the museum is 8 floors up? No, I didn't think I did. God damn it, there's never a superhero around when you need one. Look, some kind of performance art. Cool. Shh, don't tell. So that's an extract from one part of Dragman, and it's the first part I wrote because I was really struggling with finding a voice for the book, and you know, because I wanted the book to kind of reflect, you know, what it's really like, the sort of excitement of going out dressed. There's me probably about 20 years ago. And I wanted it to kind of explore, be sort of true about you know, the experience of finding clubs you could go to safely. And there's a rough, and there's the final drawing. I mean, one of the things about doing a graphic novel that I discovered, you know, this is the first one I've sort of done, was that you have to draw the whole thing to work it out. You can't just write it. And then you have to draw it again, you know, when you've worked it out. And I wanted it to reflect, you know, certainly my confusion about what I was. You know, was I a man dressing up? Should I have, you know, been born a girl? What, you know, all these different sort of things. You know, who did I want to be? And my confusion about my sexuality. You know, was I interested in guys or, you know, girls or whatever? And I put real things from my own experience in it. Because, I mean, I actually found a stocking down the back of a sofa in the first student flat I ever lived in, and I put it on, and that's the first time it occurred to me that I could, you know, dress as a woman, even though I hadn't been born one. And as I started to try and work on the book, I tried all sorts of kind of tricks, I suppose. I went to Berlin, which, you know, I thought, if I go somewhere else, I can maybe be inspired in a way that I'm not sitting in my studio that you can see behind me. So I went to Berlin, and I had notebooks, and I sort of filled them in, and I made little kind of ideas about the kind of, you know, because even things like what kind of crimes would Dragman thwart? Would it be minor ones like sort of, you know, a dog soiling the pavement, oi, use a bag, you know, or bad dress sense like in the original cartoon? Or would he save the world, you know? And what should he wear? Should he look sexy? Should he be ordinary? Should he be outrageous? You know, all these kind of questions. And I went and stayed at my cousin's house. She's got a shed in this little woods behind her house, and I could go with a flask of coffee and sit in there and think. And I had various ideas and so on, but it didn't come to life. And I had a job in New York painting a hotel room. There I am. And I thought, maybe I can set it in this really cool hotel, you know, where all the rooms are painted by different artists, and none of it kind of came alive. And then I had an exhibition in Mallorca in a little gallery that I've had 2 or 3 other shows in. And I went with a friend of mine, and the exhibition was fun. And, you know, that's the opening night, me standing by my name sign. And afterwards, me and my friend stayed in an Airbnb for a few nights just to kind of have a bit more holiday. And she asked me how the book was going, and I kind of moaned on about how I couldn't find the voice of it and so on. And she kind of told me off and just said, "Oh, for goodness sake, you know, you're being self-indulgent, just get on with it." And I got really cross, and I kind of walked off, and I came back and apologized for walking off and all that kind of stuff. And then the next morning I woke up, and suddenly I had this kind of like a play, and all that bit I read out to you, I just wrote it all down in my notebook. And my friend got up, and I said, "Shush, you know, I'm finally working on it." And she went, "Oh, okay." And that was the beginning of the book. And that's what my agent sold the book on. So I was able to come back to my studio and, you know, make all those kind of cards. I tried all those different things you read about and hear about, you know, making diagrams of the world and the characters, and, you know, little post-it notes, the arc of the story. And I would do them and then never look at them again. And I had this sort of slogan stuck up on my metal pinboard thing. And this was said by a friend's son who was about 15 at the time. He went to see a film, and he was asked what he thought of it. And he said, "Well, it was ambitious, but it wasn't engaging." And I thought, that's a really good kind of motto. I can't think of the right word. And I wanted Dragman to be ambitious and sort of multi-layered, but also really engaging. And so I started kind of making these little bits. There's a character called Dog Girl who is basically becomes Dragman's sidekick, and she has super smelling ability. But the important thing as well is that she is just herself. Dragman is part-time August Crimp and part-time Dragman with the two identities, but she's just Dog Girl always, 24/7. And I slowly kind of got the book sorted out. And this is kind of how I would do the roughs for a section and how it appeared eventually in the book. And I did a first draft and I thought, oh, brilliant, you know, I've kind of cracked it. And then I reread the first draft and it was awful. So I did a second draft and a third draft. And finally, I did a sort of fourth draft, took on board sort of comments from Jonathan Cape, the publisher, and my agent. And finally, we sent it out to other publishers in other countries. And I was thinking that I was kind of there. And then the German publisher I had rejected the book. They said it wasn't what they'd expected. And it wasn't what they wanted to publish. And I thought, oh no, you know, because you sort of send something out and you don't get a response. I don't know if this is true for Alex and Paul, but you kind of send something out and you want to reply like the next day, but of course that doesn't happen. And, you know, I think the German publisher took about a month to get back to me, and none of the other publishers that I potentially had got back to me at all. So I thought I haven't got it right. It's completely hopeless. And then about 2 weeks after the German publisher rejected it, my American publisher wrote to me saying totally the opposite, saying that it was, you know, well, sort of saying it was a masterpiece and all of these different things. And I just thought, wow, well, somewhere between these two extremes is hopefully a book that's kind of okay, you know. So I just started doing the finished drawings based on the roughs that you're seeing, which the roughs were the fourth draft. And you know, finally finished it, and it, you know, came out, like Paul said, last year. So I think that's all I need to say at this point.
That's wonderful. It's very gratifying to hear that graphic novelists go through so many drafts and all the agonies that other novelists go through.
Well, you can imagine how horrendous it is when you realise you've gone down a tangent that's just pointless, and you've done 48 pages of rough drawings, and basically they need to be binned, you know. It's kind of like, oh no.
I think we'll go over and talk to Alex, and we'll come back to you in a little while, Stephen. Thank you very much. Alex, you last performed with Polari, I think in Birmingham on tour a couple of years ago.
Yeah.
And the new book is the third in the series, is that right?
That's right, yeah. Third in the series. Started with The House on Half Moon Street, then The Anarchists Club, and now The Butcher of Berners Street.
I fell in love with Leo from the very first book. I just completely became besotted with Leo. What inspired you to write about this character and at this point in history? We should say it's set in Victorian England.
What inspired me initially was wanting to write about identity. Actually, in some ways, you know, and I love Dragman, and that was brilliant, by the way, Stephen, just to say.
Thank you.
And some of those same issues, you know, with Dog Girl and her identity and all of that. And I feel sort of, it was the issues of identity, of people being able to choose their identity, that really inspired me. And then on top of that, friends of mine having experiences, some of which were difficult, which I felt a lot of compassion for and wanted to write about as well. so somehow those things came together in a character, and I wanted to set it in the past because I wanted to set it before, partly before kind of surgery and you know, steroid help and things like that came in, and so I wanted to set it before that. And that particular period, the 1880s, really appealed to me because that was such a period of change where everyone was going through lots of change. So I wanted this character who would remain the same. He remains himself throughout the whole story, and while everything is changing around him, and he's the trans one, but everything else is changing while he stays the same, and that kind of appealed to me. So that's why I picked that era.
The first book was the Richard and Judy book club choice. That's pretty amazingly mainstream for such a queer story. Were you surprised at that?
Yeah, I was absolutely staggered. Although I will say I didn't really know what it meant. In that, you know, but the publisher rang me up and said, "Oh, amazing! You know, you're going to be a Richard and Judy pick." And honestly, I didn't. I was very innocent. I didn't really know that that was a big deal. And then it kind of happened, and you know, and then it's in Smiths and everything, and I was quite excited. But I think it was other people's reaction to it that made me feel more excited. I didn't really know what it was.
Could you give us a taste of Leo?
So I've got a couple of readings. I mean, I'm going to do one that's more about Leo, if I get that chance. But this one is just the beginning of the book. Actually, it's the beginning of I'm getting tangled up. It's the beginning of The Butcher of Berners Street. So I'll just read you the opening 2 pages, I think, quite quickly. The 2 women climbed into the ring and faced each other as if they were about to dance. Both were wearing long-sleeved buttonless vests, but while one had chosen a long skirt, the other was sporting a pair of linen drawers belted at the waist. The bell rang and they grappled for 4, perhaps 5 seconds, until the one wearing the drawers, who was a fearsome specimen indeed, with hands like chuck steaks and features that seemed too large for her face, wrenched the other sideways, sending her off balance. From that point on, the bout's conclusion was inevitable. The soon-to-be victor shook the soon-to-be loser as if she was emptying a sack of flour before slamming her down and forcing an arm across her throat, causing the poor woman to go pink and slap the floor in surrender, raising a mist of chalk dust. The winner leapt to her feet, arms aloft, and accepted the scattered, cursory applause of the crowd. "I beat her," she declared, in an accent as thick as her forearms. "I beat everyone. I win always." The purple bow she was using to tie back her hair bounced up and down as she jumped. The referee sprang onto the stage, stepping over the prone figure of the defeated. "The Hungarian Lady Vostok is our champion," he bellowed, "all the way from Budapest." I exchanged a look with Constable Pallet. I should say, so I'm going to interrupt myself. It's written in the first person, so when he says I, this is Leo who is talking now. I exchanged a look with Constable Pallet, who was standing near the back of the hall, his height giving him a view over the flat caps and occasional bowler. I had suggested to him that he should try to merge into the throng, drinking ale and laying bets as if his week's rent depended on it, but he was as inconspicuous as a lighthouse. He might as well have been wearing his police uniform. The few who had gathered to gamble on the Hungarian Lady Vostok at terrible odds of 1 to 10 on collected their meagre winnings while the rest waited for the real match. The ladies' bout was little more than a novelty, a diversion, and many of the spectators had missed the excitement completely, taking the opportunity to visit the bar. But the referee had not finished. He was a handsome fellow with a build that might have made him a wrestler himself, though his pristine face had surely never been pummeled by an elbow or squeezed between a mighty pair of thighs. He drew in his breath and swept an arm across the crowd. "It's time, ladies and gentlemen," he proclaimed inaccurately, because there was only men watching as far as I could see. "Time to see which among you will dare to fight the Hungarian Lady Vostok. She's taken on all comers for the last 6 weeks, men and women alike, and she remains unbeaten. Will you be the one? Fame awaits, ladies and gentlemen. Which of you will risk your good health and reputation to battle a lady?" And so that's a little reading. Leo is the first person. He's the trans character in the book, and the book kind of explores his identity, and also through the woman that he meets, Lady Vostok, who is a cis woman, and she has all sorts of mysteries around her. So that's the kind of idea of the book.
It seems to me that there's something inherently political about historical fiction that features queer characters, because official history basically erases them often. You can find out about these people. There are historical records about them. It's just that they're so often ignored.
there are absolutely historical records of queer characters, queer people at the time, and trans people who were clearly trans at the time. I mean, you know, that was they wanted that identity, and yet actually Victorian, it's not just the history of Victorian literature. There's no, I literally can't find any contemporaneous Victorian literature at all that includes a trans character or an overtly trans character. It is just a huge gap. So for me, it was a part of it was just to think, I just want to put these people back into the literature. They existed, they were real at the time. They don't exist in the literature. Why don't we kind of put them back in? And I really cared about that. That was a hugely important thing. And I recently had a lovely opportunity to exchange a couple of emails with Sarah Waters, and she said exactly the same thing. That was a big part of why she wrote Fingersmith and Tipping the Velvet, was putting you know, lesbian women back into history who had been missing up to that point.
Your writing is also under the very broad umbrella of crime writing, and my impression of crime writing is that it's much more open, perhaps, than other genre fiction is to queerness. And I think that's probably inherent in crime writing in some way, because people were outside the law.
And that certainly gives us an opportunity, doesn't it? And I think that's true. And crime writing is such an amazingly broad area. I mean, it's almost not one genre, it's a million genres all packed in with just that one theme in common. And so I think there's tremendous opportunity. And there are some brilliant writers, by the way, doing, you know, some wonderful work in romance literature and all sorts of things. You know, people like Julie Cohen, who I know you've had on, you know, doing great stuff. So it's not only crime, but I do agree that it does give us a bit more scope, doesn't it? For you too. I mean, as a crime writer yourself. So.
Thank you very much, Alex. I think we'll go back to Steven now. I wanted to ask you, how personal is the book? You've sort of alluded to it already.
I felt that that it was best for me to kind of, that I could make it most authentic. I wanted a book that was an entertainment, but that really showed a truth about one aspect, at least, of the trans experience. And so it was simpler, well, most accurate for me to use my own experience. I mean, I wanted to make a kind of thriller type of thing, and I love sort of Scandi noir sort of crime fiction and stuff like that. So I wanted a kind of darkness in the book, and then I can't resist putting in surreal things like it's set in a version of London where a scientist has proved the existence of the human soul, which then becomes a kind of metaphor for being true to your soul, and so on. And so I had all these layers, but the most important one really was the trans sort of base of August Crimp's experience. I do find the whole identity thing so interesting, because back in the mid-70s, I didn't know sort of what I was. I couldn't work it out at all. And in a sense, I sort of, I guess you know, I had things like pantomime dames and stuff, or Monty Python people dressed as women, you know, to look at, and so on and so on. But so it was sort of very difficult to kind of decide what I was, you know, and also technically I was a transvestite, which is a word I believe has gone right out of fashion. But that was a kind of medical deviation description. You know what I mean? So all these different kind of inputs, and my way of dealing with it, in a sense, was to kind of see it as a kind of arty, surreal thing. And I came to kind of see my transness as a kind of blessing, where I could I don't know, sort of have fun with it, really, and kind of in a sort of surreal sense. And I put it into my work quite a lot as well. Anyway,
I think you have another presentation for us, which sort of talks a bit about this.
I mean, I can skip through it. I wasn't quite, you know, how much to prepare, but you know, this is me. I'm around about 15 or 16, and there happens to be this photograph on my family's first holiday into Europe. We were in Portugal. And I remember it kind of vividly because I went into the gents' toilets somewhere in Portugal, and I was sort of ejected from the gents and made to go in the ladies. And that was kind of sort of a big thing when I was about 15. When I was a tiny kid, this is something from Dragman, but I remember my mum letting me do up her suspenders, and it was kind of like difficult, and, you know, and in my head, I just remember assuming that one day I'd have suspenders of my own to do up, you know. And then, you know, once I sort of, this is true as well, when I realized that I was a boy and wasn't going to grow up into a girl, I was, you know, fine with that. And I did boy stuff. And then there was the finding of the stocking. And, but I also remember sort of wishing that one day I'd sort of find I'd changed. So it was a kind of mixed thing that I didn't really understand. And back in the 60s, I think maybe the early 70s, I used to buy Oz magazine and other underground press magazines and underground comics by Robert Crumb and so on. And I came across in an issue of Oz, an extract from this book, The Virgin Sperm Dancer, which, due to the wonders of the internet, I was actually able to buy, you know, years and years later. But the extract was it's basically about a boy who goes to bed and wakes up in the morning as a girl. And once that idea was in my head, it just stayed there. And this book is actually just a kind of excuse for sort of soft porn, erotic sort of photographs of a girl. But, you know, to me, back in the Oz days, it was more than that. And also there were things like, you know, I was obsessed with Catwoman when I was a kid, and, you know, I couldn't think of anybody more kind of cool than Catwoman to have as a sort of model. So, you know, I used to dress as Catwoman at you know, fancy dress parties, which was another way of, I always dressed, you know, as some kind of a girl character at fancy dress parties. But of course, finding the stocking and dressing in secret, I mean, started all these kind of issues for me, you know. So, you know, I used to make these sort of books, the Book of Secrets, and this one's earlier, the Book of Torments, which was obviously me feeling really guilty. You know, and I'd occasionally sort of mix it up and kind of wear strange combinations. And my work always had elements of secrets. That big drawing is obviously kind of somebody not facing up to something. Polaroids, of course, exciting before digital photography. But secrets, you know, tell me all your secrets, I'll put them in my drawings, was an exhibition I had. Also in my work, this is a drawing for the New Musical Express. And I used to, I sort of kind of, one of my kind of metaphors was mutants. I felt like I was a bit of a mutant, you know. So I sort of played around with different kinds of mutants. A boy who's got lots of buttocks and is saying, "Mummy, I need to go to the toilets." And, you know, and in my Rockets Passing Overhead comic strip, I've got characters like Limbs Jones, who stokes the atomic furnace of Captain Starr's ship, The Boiling Hell. And a very early exhibition from, like, I don't know, 1980, this is a really bad picture. This strange painting was called "I'm Not Myself Today, I'm Somebody Else." So all those kind of things. And then, you know, I used to do, slip into my comic strips people who wanted to dress as fish, or somebody dressed as a plant, or a plant dressed as a person. Here's Navigator Black. I always dress as a fish in the privacy of my own room. And again, Limbs Jones, who's actually a plant when he takes off his head. It just used to mess around with all these kind of layers of reality. And here's 3 nudists wearing clothes, so that you don't know what somebody is underneath. And this is interesting because I've called it a double perversion. This is something from probably about 1992. A man dressed as a woman, dressed as a man. So I was, you know, still kind of really struggling with the issue of whether what I did pre the internet, when you can look it up, was normal or not, you know. And this is a Guardian cartoon. Mrs. Plant Person finds out that her husband is really an alien life form, you know, again, dressing up. In my cartoon in the Times, I had a character that was loosely sort of me, Steve and Stephanie, who was murdered and dismembered and scattered about. But, you know, I was kind of playing with it, really. And here's another detail from a Guardian cartoon. A nudist fancy dress party. The first book I did on my own, my first solo book, was Normal Sex, where I put all sorts of abnormal things in and called them all normal, you know. Anyway, and all the time I was kind of dressing up and, you know, putting the transvestite family in a book. And then eventually when I was, you know, much more kind of out, this was a stage show that a local theatre company in Peckham made from my work, which was also seen at the ICA, and Crocs in Frocks, you know, it was kind of much more out about it, although I still wasn't dressing as I do now. And here another book where I'm playing the part of air guitarist and air violinist Fanny Smith. And in my Guardian cartoon, you know, Loomis, transvestite dad. Morning, kids, what are you wearing, Dad? You're so embarrassing. And then that's me with my kids, probably about 10 years ago, I think. Because I used to go sort of looking like in that picture to their parents' evenings and so on. And I remember sort of saying to them, when I heard one of their friends complaining how embarrassing her mum was. And I thought, oh my God, you know, I must be, you know, loads worse. And I said, you know, your friend's embarrassed about her mum because she talks too loudly or whatever. You know, what about me? And they said, oh no, you're not embarrassing, Dad. And I just thought it was so kind of sweet, you know, and wonderful.
I want to follow up on this, on what you were just saying about lack of visibility and lack of people to identify with, and go back to Alex. Leo is living at a time when you really would think you were the only trans person in the world.
Yeah.
And yet Leo is very, very self-assured right from the beginning of the very first book.
Partly because I took a very, very deliberate decision to start the book well after he had sort of confirmed his own identity. You know, it doesn't deal with him transitioning or going through that decision process or anything. It starts well after that. So to some extent, he is used to it. And so it does sort of rely on, I think, the book sort of relies on him being pretty self-assured about who he is and what he is. He's very uncomfortable about other things, but I think what he is and who he is completely certain of. I actually had a question for Steve. Can I ask Stephen a quick question first? Are you going to follow up Dragman? Because I want a sequel.
I don't know is the answer. I found it really hard to work this last year. And yeah, I mean, I've wondered about following it up, but in a funny sort of way, I've kind of said everything. I didn't want to lecture in the book or preach or anything like that, but I've sort of put all that stuff in the subtext of it. And so if I did another book, it would be a pure entertainment, I think. Or I haven't seen how to do another book yet. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I totally do. But I just, as a vote of one, I'd be fine with pure entertainment if you give us another one. Anyway,
it was also bloody hard work.
Well, there's that. Yeah, no, I do. And I think we've all found it really hard to work over the last year, haven't we? Anyway, right, a reading. So I'm going to read you a bit from page 78. So we're a bit further on. Leo, searching again for this woman, has gone to a telegram office to try to get hold of this woman, and he's had no luck. He knows that she sent a telegram at a certain time, but he hasn't had any luck getting hold of her. So he steps outside and he meets someone, and I'll just read you a few pages and then we'll go. Mister, the boy who'd been staring was loitering next to me with his hands in his pockets as if we were two old friends deciding where to go for lunch. He had a narrow face, well-brushed hair, and his voice wasn't yet broken. I found a farthing in my pocket and handed it to him, and would have been on my way, except he seemed to have something further he wished to tell me. I'm a messenger boy, he declared. You don't have a uniform. They don't have them size to fit me, sir. I'm small for my age. I see. My mind was already pondering on whether Rosie would be finished at church. Her shop was on my route home, and I was keen to know whether she had any of yesterday's pies left over. I know who sent that gram, the boy said. 12:15 on Wednesday. I'll tell you for the right price. I was jolted back to the present, really. Who was it? He gave me a terse little smile, not unlike the telegram clerk's. For the right price, I said. What's your name? Everyone calls me Runt. Children can be cruel. He acknowledged the point with an inclination of his head. Better small than dim-witted is the way I see it. I keep my eyes open and I'm here every day, rain or shine. He was tidy enough and seemed well fed, but that didn't mean he was honest. He would most likely take my money and give me the name of the last person he delivered to or one he'd made up. I didn't want to waste my time searching for an address of someone perfectly innocent or who might not even exist. What did you see? He took up a discursive posture, as if about to embark on a lengthy story for which I didn't have time. A number of gentlemen tutted as they stepped around us, and one had bumped me in the back of the leg with his briefcase, I was quite sure deliberately. Well, that's the question, isn't it, sir? It was the kind of thing that doesn't happen every day, so I took note. I thought to myself, Runt, you should remember that because you call yourself Runt. He shrugged. Like I said, everyone does. It's a good thing I did take note because now I have the information and you require it. A shilling seems like a fair exchange. 6pence. I extracted 2 threepences from my pocket and held them in front of his face. Half now and half afterwards, if what you say is credible. I felt sorry for the lad and had no desire to torment him, but he could run off with my money as quick as blinking if he chose, and I could ill afford the loss. He pulled a face. How do I know what you'll credit and what you won't? It don't sound like a normal happening, which is why it's stuck out. You might think it's outlandish and refuse to pay, though it's the God's honest truth. That's a risk you'll have to take. He seemed on the prongs of indecision, but as I started to walk away, he hurried after me, matching each of my strides with 2 of his own. All right, sir, I will gladly accept your miserly offer in the spirit of goodwill, which I'll hope you'll remember when it comes time to requite the balance. That is to say, pay up. I handed him one of the coins, which he rubbed between his fingers. When he was satisfied it was made of metal and of the proper size, he put it into his pocket. Here's what I know, sir. It was on Wednesday last, and I'd come back from Dunster Court, where a gentleman was receiving the price per ton of something, though I know not what. He didn't seem pleased, and no tip was forthcoming. Is that relevant? I couldn't bring myself to address him as Runt. No, sir. I include the detail as a bit of garnish to my explanation, so you'll understand why I was present in the spot. A quick job, you see, there and back in time to see a certain lady waiting to send her gram. A lady, you're sure? Hadn't been one female in the room when I'd been in there, not among the customers, the clerks, or the messengers. Oh, yes, sir. She was certainly a lady. Her attire was most distinctive, no mistaking that. I wasn't sure what he meant. He took my silence as a prompt to hold out his hand again. It might be that I'll remember more specifics when I've got the expectation of a square meal or two in the near future, sir. My memory works best when I know my hunger will shortly be assuaged. My own hunger was starting to pinch. We were turning into Eastcheap, a road which would, after a mile and several name changes, go straight past Rosie's shop. First, explain to me why her attire was so distinctive. Was she dressed in an especially feminine way? In a manner of speaking, sir, yes. He pushed his hand further towards me, and with great reluctance, I placed the other threepence into his palm. Tell me everything you know about this person. There will be no more money. He thrust the coin into his pocket and kept his hand there also, as if concerned that I might attempt to steal the payment back from him. As I say, I was present when she arrived. It was a quiet morning, with more lads waiting to deliver grams than grams coming in, so many of us were stood in the street with our poor bellies rumbling and no chance of a tip. She went in, and I noticed her straight away. So distinctive was she. Please get to the point. Normally his verbosity would have amused me, but I didn't have time. He breathed in deeply. She was a nun, sir. A nun? Like in a convent? This seemed ridiculous. Surely nuns didn't visit city post offices in the middle of the day. He nodded. Exactly so, sir. Wearing the full attire of nunhood, which is why the moment made such an impression upon me. We don't get many nuns here, sir. In fact, I surmise she may have been the first. I wasn't sure whether to believe him, and yet there was something about his tale that made me think it was genuine. If he'd been lying, he would have said it was a tall man in a flat cap called whatever name popped into his head. But a nun? That was sufficiently ridiculous to have the ring of truth. What was her name and address? His earnest expression faltered. That's not information I possess, sir. I mean, she didn't give it. Surely what I've told you is worth what you paid, but perhaps a tip in addition. I have a sister who'd like to eat also. Did you see what she looked like? He took a step away from me, looking rightwards at the lanes leading north. Like a nun, sir, more or less. She was a distance away and they all looked much the same, which I suspect is their intention. And how do you know she sent this particular telegram and not some other one that happened to go simultaneously? He took another step sideways. It's possible, sir, but it'd be a coincidence, don't you agree? For her to be so unusual and for you to be searching for a person at precisely that moment? I stopped and faced him. Perhaps, but quick as a rat, he was gone. There you go.
Wonderful. I was going to suggest, I think there seems to be a lot more trans representation now. I mean, just to mark from what I see running the Polari Prize, we've been running since 2011. And last year we had a record number of books submitted by trans authors, many of which made the shortlist. And our current winner, Amru Al-Qadi, is non-binary. Is publishing sort of catching up? And did you have any resistance when you submitted your stories of Leo? Was that ever brought up as an issue with by anyone?
It wasn't actually brought up except by me, really. It's a huge concern for me around cultural appropriation and all of that. And I sort of set rules for myself and I talked to a lot of people and made sure that I felt that I was doing at least something that had some justification, albeit, still arguably problematic. I mean, I'm not sort of unaware of that. But I really wanted to write these stories. I really wanted to put, because it's not really about being trans. It's just about a character who happens to be trans. And I just wanted to sort of normalize it. Otherwise, what are we going to have? We'll just have trans people in books only written by trans people. And that seemed wrong. So I kind of, I do struggle with it still, but I felt that that it was a story I wanted to tell and a publisher wanted to publish. I'm thrilled and delighted that there are more trans books appearing and more trans authors getting, good reputations and names for themselves and attention from publishers and readers. And I think that's brilliant. And I just look forward to it growing. But I will say, I still think that, I'm writing about a trans man. I still think that authors are somewhat shy publishers are still somewhat shy of writing of some topics around trans women because of the contention that goes on around that. And I still think that does hold them back a little bit. And I think that's a real shame because I think there's some great stories to be told. I mean, actually, the odd thing is, of course, that writing about a trans man, most of the time, of course, inevitably, he's treated by everyone around him as a man, right? And they, most of the people around him have no idea that he's trans, obviously. So, and I am a man, so it's easy to write how people reflect that. It's much, in some ways, when I'm writing his sort of good friend Rosie, who is the sort of sidekick character in the sort of crime aspect of the novel. Writing about her is harder because suddenly you've got to put words into a woman's mouth and she is true. Do you know what I mean? And we all write multiple characters in our novels. We write women and men and all sorts of other characters and children, and somehow you've got to represent all of those as an author. And I think, in many respects, I find her harder to write than Leo because Leo's a bloke and I'm a bloke, and so most of the time that's more straightforward.
How do you feel about this issue, Stephen, about who has permission to tell whose stories, which is a really hot topic at the moment, isn't it?
Yes, it is. And I haven't really reached the bottom of it, if you like. I mean, I completely agree with you and Alex that you can't say that no one can write anybody except themselves. The authors have to be able to write all kinds of characters, but I can see that certain subjects and so on, are very tricky. I
wouldn't probably write a contemporary novel about someone transitioning, for example, because I do think you would probably need to have that first-hand experience unless you were a really quite remarkable writer, better than me. So setting it in 1880 and, you know, well post-transition, and a character who happens to be trans,
yes,
I felt more able to tell that story, I guess. But that, you know, that was my logic at the time.
and I think it's clearly really good for there to be all sorts of characters in all sorts of novels, you know. So, you know, it shouldn't be unusual for there to be a trans protagonist, or, you know, it should all be possible. So hopefully it becomes less of an issue soon, you know. And I realized that in sort of acting and films and so on, there are similar massive issues about who can play who.
Yeah, and actually I was very keen when for the audiobooks, so all 3 audiobooks are narrated by the same person. I was very, very keen that should be a trans man. I thought that would be appropriate to voice Leo, and also to give you know, a very young at the time and very new actor a sort of chance to have his voice heard. And that's Ashpar Musciano, who's now in Emmerdale as a regular. So, you know, I don't think it helped his career. I think he was going places anyway because he's very talented. But you know what I mean? It was nice to do. So I think that kind of representation, I'm very keen that should be the case. So yeah.
Well, yes, and Dragman has been optioned for, you know, for a possible TV series. You know, who knows whether that will ever happen, because they mostly don't. But and obviously, you know, she should be played by a trans actor.
Dave Cross commented, oh, well, that was quite a while ago, Dave, said, brilliant. What was that about, Dave?
And it was about Stephen's book. I just loved looking at the images, the finished images from Dragman. I mean, I'm a real comic book geek, and I love graphic novels. And I'm when this is finished, I'm going to order it on Amazon. I just thought it looked
fantastic.
It looked lovely. So thank you. Thank you very much.
Jason's asking, Stephen, do you find the writing or the visuals more time consuming?
With my comic strips for the newspapers, the writing was always the hardest thing. It might take days. I mean, ideas sometimes just come immediately, but with Dragman, it did take me about 8 years from when Jonathan Cape expressed interest in the idea of it to actually get it finished. And it was definitely the ideas and the writing and the voice. But then it took me about 8 months to draw it in the end. I found the whole kind of media world of books and newspapers and, you know, completely open. Since I've started kind of living like this, which is about 11 years now, I think, all the time, I've had no problems with work and all of that kind of thing. And, you know, television and, you know, that everybody's been fine. But, you know, back when it was secret, I was very frightened, you know, of being found out and my career would be destroyed and all of that. And, you know, it really was probably even through the 90s, I was frightened of that. So it's really the last 20 years, I think there's been a massive shift. And the thing about identity, like Alex was saying, I love that people can now be who they want to be. And I know it's still difficult. And I know trans men and trans women who still sort of have problems in their lives, obviously, but so hopefully it'll get better and better and better. But being able to have all these different things you can be, genderqueer, trans, you know, I just think that's totally brilliant now.